Welcome back. Today we are going to do a quick one on the AFUL Cantor. So first, before we begin, I do want to thank HiFiGo for touring this set. I get to spend some time with it, and then it will be on to the next person. But I do appreciate the opportunity to hear this set, as it is a bit pricey. It's about $800. You can tell the build quality is actually quite nice. There are 14 balanced armatures kind of stuffed in there, and you can get a quick glimpse of them. But what people kind of more notice right up front is the nozzle. It sort of looks like maybe edemotic. It's kind of probing is what I will call it. We'll talk a little bit about that in a second as well. But this is the cable. It is a blue sleeve cable. It's not modular. It does come with a nice case. It does come with a decent box. But we'll kind of jump into it there. And that is the graph that you see up there. I probably won't speak too much to the graph. It's bass boosted, upper treble boosted. The rest of the middle is sort of flat, and that's kind of how it sounds as well. But I think the obvious question on this one is the fit. And like I said, the nozzle isn't quite as typical as other sets. It looks a little bit elongated, and they did it for a specific reason. And I think a lot of it had to do with their treble tuning and how they have these balanced armatures actually tuned and piping through the nozzle without any dampers. That was, I think, part of the trade-off in doing that style, was they had to do this. But I will say I don't like the fit. You can kind of look at it and say this one is going to be very tough to either put your tips on or get the right distance inside of your ear canal, and it's all of those things. If you do a shallow fit, it'll sound quite peaky, as you're expecting it to sound, because that's what most sets will do when you have a shallow fit like that. If you do a deep fit, you'll get kind of no stage and less extension. Their instructions basically tell you to slide the tip on, so the top of the tip is at the top of the metal nozzle. If you do that and slide it into your ear and you get a deeper fit, the stage kind of goes a little bit wonky and the treble gets a little bit wonky. So I think the good news is you only have to do this once. You buy the set, you kind of have to figure this all out at once. But yeah, I will say that you have to figure out where the midpoint is between a shallow fit and a deep fit, where everything sounds about right. And it's a little bit more than, just slide your normal tips so they are flush with the metal nozzle. It's not quite that simple. So not a fan of doing that. Not a fan of doing that at $800. I think it was a bit too complicated, and I'm not sure that there is really a bonus for doing this. I mean, I understand the rationale and the way they tune the treble. It sort of required this style nozzle, but is there a payoff there? Yeah, I don't know about that. So the non-obvious question on this one, and sort of your top level decision on Cantor, is: are you okay with a too clean, technical over musical, analytical over warmth? It's very much all of those things. It's quite clean presentation. It always sounds a little bit more technical than musical, and I will say it's quite analytical over warmth. There isn't a whole lot of warmth here because of how they tune the bass shelf. So, for those of you who are looking for a 14 balanced armature that leans on the technical side as opposed to maybe a lush, rich mid style, it's not that. It's more of a treble, technical style, analytical style. That's kind of where its sweet spot is. And I will be the first to admit it. Cantor does have quite nice text to it, but it's a bit sterile. And for those of you who are really looking for a technical set, I think it does that quite well. If you're looking for other things, if text is kind of like your third down on the priority list, and you're looking for very rich, natural style mids, it's probably not that style. But for those of you who prioritize text in that way, resolution or detail, it's kind of up there. Still probably not my favorite text set, but it's at least they tuned it in that way. And for people who are trying to decide whether they should get Cantor or other sets, to be aware that this one is more of a preference style. I wouldn't call this an everyday carry style unless your priority is the technical bit of music, as opposed to the musicality or the warmth, richness, kind of a lush style mids. So the sound is very U-shaped, but the sub bass and upper treble are the tent poles of this tuning. So quite a boost here and quite a boost here. Everything in the middle and you can't really tell by the graph, and that's why I'm not going to talk about the graph too much, but there's a really big bass boost here. There's an upper treble boost, and everything in between is sort of flattened out and more neutral style. And you sort of notice their engagement points are right here and right here. This is actually supposed to downslope kind of right here, and there's a peak like there. If you look at their graph, that's about what it looks like. So not quite a traditional tuning. That's why I said it. If you're looking for an everyday carry set, and you may have other sets, and you're looking for something that's done in a 14BA style, that's just, you know, a more technical version of that. It's not quite that. This tuning is a little bit more preferential, a little bit more of a specialist, and it doesn't quite fit every music genre because of where they kind of stuck these tent poles in at the outer edges. So the bass, again, I'm just not a fan of doing this big sub bass boost and having very little mid bass, and that's exactly the way this one comes across. And because it's done in balanced armatures, it sort of leans into that sound even more than a dynamic driver would. A dynamic driver with this shape, this is pretty much the Harman shape, would actually present a little bit more mid-bass presence, but doing it in a balanced armature style is very much a sub-bass focus. There's not a whole lot of mid-bass, and this lack of mid-bass kind of gives you a thinness to it. So just not a fan of that, and I think I would call the basses somewhere between tight and textured. That's what you get from the balanced armatures, and it's almost too fast because that's what you also get from the balanced armatures. This lack of mid-bass, it just presents very fast. There's not a whole lot of decay to it. You know, I think some people will appreciate that in balanced armature bass. I think some people will just say the lack of mid-bass can sound very clean, very sterile, but also not really providing enough body for the mids and leaving some thinness to the lower mids, and that's kind of what comes across to me. A warmer source will certainly work here to fill it out a little bit, but that's, you know, counter to the tuning that they presented. But I will say that a warmer source will probably at least address that little bit there, and it will sound a little bit better. But so the mids, I think on one hand, I do like the flat part of the mids. I do like 14 balanced armatures. I think they do sound quite technical. It's actually a nice presentation in that way, but yeah, I think the upper mid, lower ear gain, I think that was pretty much right on. This is quite a bit lower than Harman. I think that was a really nice thing to do. It's a nice change. But the lowered mid bass and then this upper treble boost to it, I think those two, you know, they kind of lean into this thinner sound. They both work together to give you a thinner presentation. This is more of a detailed upper range set, and the lower resonance and those reverbs are just really harder to hear. Anything that you were expecting to hear down in this range, quite hard to hear, and that ends up being quite a bit of music as well. I think if you really pay attention, if you are a tech guy and you kind of are used to hearing a lot of the technical sharp details and resolution on the treble, I think this set works fine. If you're into the lower bits, the decays and the reverbs, those are going to be much harder to hear because of how this is tuned and how they drop that down so much lower than it probably should be. It's a little bit less than neutral. So on the other hand, you know, I think the mids are quite clean. There's no over boosted ear gain. You know, I do think the mids they present in a way that's actually quite likable. But you know, I don't know. It's a really tough set to say that it comes across as very neutral or uncolored or not engaging. And I wouldn't say it's boring. I would just say it's kind of unengaging because of where they stuck the tent poles here. The rest of this, and you don't have too much, this kind of rolls down like this. You don't have a whole lot of points that, you know, you tend to add a couple peaks into the treble, and those tend to hit the spots that our ears are used to and where instruments lie. And those tend to line up with certain parts of music, and all of that becomes, you push those forward just a little bit and they become more engaging and you know, emotive and all those things. And when you have this flat bit through the whole middle, you lose a lot of that engagement and a lot of that emotion. It just comes across as a technical set or an analytical set. And if that's your thing, then this one is kind of right there along those lines. So the treble, again, I think this is the nicer part of this set. I think it's the part that's actually done quite well. It really shows off the drivers. It does show a lack of BA timbre. I mean, they use really quite nice drivers. They tuned them in a way that's not traditional. They have a really complex way of tuning, and I forgot what the name of it was. but they essentially aren't using dampers to tune it. And I think all of that sort of worked out quite well. But kind of at the end of the day, you get down to, do you want a technically good set or a more natural, more refined set? This is almost like the opposite of the Sonian style BAs, which have that refined edge to it, right? They sound quite natural and they sound refined. They sound organic and analog almost. And then there's this set, which has this kind of sharp analytical lean to it. And they're two very, very different styles. And as I said, I wouldn't call this an everyday for every person style. It's going to be more of a specialist set that is going to lean towards a person looking for something very specific. But the treble, I would say, like the sub bass, I'm just not a fan of this upper treble style boosting. You lower the ear gain, and I think that was great, but trying to backfill detail and presence and engagement with that upper treble can be equally fatiguing and off natural, and you do get a little bit of that, especially if you have tracks that hit out there kind of hard. It becomes quite noticeable and it will become fatiguing after a while. Stage is good, but again, it's all about the fit. If you get the fit right, the stage is actually quite nice. Get the fit wrong, and the stage will be wrong. And so lastly, I'll sort of say generally about what I've noticed about AFUL and how they've been doing things. They really pitch these technology points, and Cantor is sort of no different. They have a bunch of technologies that they implemented on a 14BA, decided to charge a lot of money for it, and then when you kind of step through it and say, well, they have this really complex chamber for the bass to make it deep and resonant and all that, and then you end up with a tuning that is essentially primarily sub bass. You go through a lot of work to do this bass style and a balanced armatures, and then you don't really give a full bass shelf, and it's hard to notice what they did on the technology versus how they tuned it and how it presents. The two are sort of at odds with each other. You went through a lot of work to present just a small bit of how it could sound if they had just changed this to more of a glide. Same thing on the treble. They have this complex balanced armature tuning, no dampers, this extended nozzle, all these things to get the balanced armatures for the treble to sound the way they want it to sound. And then they have this weird fit that is going to affect this, how the treble sounds in your ear. The fit is everything. A little bit shallow and this thing sounds really peaky, a little bit too deep and it sounds a little bit truncated. A couple millimeters difference, and you are making a bigger difference than any of the technology bits that they used inside the shell. And I thought that, again, it's one of these things that you went through a lot of trouble to implement something that is going to be so easily, skewed by someone trying to get their right tips and fit, and their ears are weird. And so I sort of like the way they are trying to develop technologies, but at the end of the day, they have to fit in with how people use IEMs, and they've got to contribute more to the overall tuning. Tuning matters just as much as the technology bits, and they seem to be really heavily focused on implementing things as opposed to making things that sound in ear and how they present. So that is what I got on Cantor. So thank you guys again for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.